We are back on another XRP podcast. And of course, joining me now is the one and only Abs, coming over from Good Evening Crypto, and brand new channel, I guess. Tell me a little bit about what happened here. You guys are now Good Evening Crypto. This is good news. We got more XRP content. Tell me what's going on.
Really exciting. We've gotten a ton of positive feedback. But first of all, I do just want to say thanks again for having me. Every day our live chat is like, when's the next collaboration with Paul? Well, their questions have been answered. It's kicking off right now. So I want to give a huge shout out to you, everything you've been doing for the XRP community and all the phenomenal interviews that you guys have been hosting. This is my brand new channel, the Good Evening Crypto channel. Now, what's exciting about this, you're going to get more content than ever. And if you're an XRP investor, as you can tell by the thumbnails, this is an XRP centric channel, not just for the clickbait, but also for the content, guys, on a lighthearted note. Every day, 11 a.m. Eastern, I'm live interacting with you. You'll get about an hour live stream. And then 5:30 p.m. Eastern, I post that short form content, about 20 minutes worth of XRP deep dives, where I take an individual topic, like whether it's the ETFs, the banking license, Fed cutting rates. We deep dive on that and we talk about the impact that we're anticipating. So really excited about this new venture. And I think I got some amazing things coming for our community.
We're starting to see a lot more expansion in content creation around XRP and Ripple, which it always it's kind of interesting. If you look at the cycles that have kind of been ebb and flow, obviously Bitcoin led out with early content creators. Then you had the ETH content creators. And of each cycle, there's usually one or two creators that kind of stick around. And then there's a handful of, projects and media products out there that have kind of transitioned through, these cycles. So it's going to be interesting to see as we get into regulatory adoption, the fact that we are going to have real utility framed into what we're going to see in the crypto infrastructure in the future, speaking XRP, I think it's going to start to narrow into a handful of assets that become the new financial content, the CNBCs, the squawk boxes of crypto. So I'm glad that you're out there doing this. So kudos to you.
Much appreciated, Paul. And I do want to give a shout out to a couple other people who you've interviewed, Mikkel, Zach Rector, the people who are leading this narrative here in the XRP community. I mean, if you look at the numbers, guys, they're steadily growing. And it's because we're providing accurate and optimistic information. As you can tell, Paul, the sentiment right now seems to be a little bit overly negative. But people like Zach and Mikkel and yourself provide that positive sentiment to give retail investors the patience that they need to profit in the crypto space. So I think it's important work that's being done.
Listen, this is something that we get a chance to talk with a lot of new investors in the space. And it's the one thing that I try to explain to everybody. I lived through, I still think, was the worst time in technology ever in history. We haven't lived through a dot bomb. No one has ever seen that unless you were in Silicon Valley at that time, which I was. I was a young engineer and I was working with Microsoft at that time. So I got a chance to see it front row. Guys, this is nothing compared to the debacle that was happening back then. In fact, I think we're much more, there's always going to be politics, but we're much more in a framework now of up and to the right. For the United States, I think there's just so much that is really playing into this. One thing, though, I want to lead off the show with, and we're going to get into Evernorth, we'll get into XRP price today. We're going to talk a lot about kind of the transition of a lot of this news that is leaning very XRP centric, even though XRP may not be in the headline. One of them is talking about the breaking of the cycle. Now, this is one thing that Raul Paul talks about. He's been on our show. In fact, I think he even mentioned on the episode we had him on, was that this elongation of the crypto cycle is now here. Do you believe that we are outside the 4-year cycle, and have we moved into something else?
All of my daily listeners know that I've taken the approach that until I see something different, I'm going to act as if we're going through the same process. Now, what's great about that is we've seen something different this time. Whether you're talking about altcoins or the momentum of Bitcoin's price action, I just want to go back to 2021 for some of the people who weren't there. During that time, during that bull market, not only were people saying this market was going to be regulated, we were waiting for ETFs. We were waiting for these liquidity cycles. There was so much uncertainty about how the United States government was going to allow American citizens to interact with the industry. And Paul, I'm sure you remember this as well. Back in 2022, during the Biden administration, there was a serious headline that exchanges may be banned inside the United States. It just goes to show how much things have changed here in 2025. So to answer your question fairly directly, the more that time goes on, the more I watch these narratives play out before my very eyes, I do think we're going through something different. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if the first 2 quarters, not just the beginning of the year, but maybe all the way into next summer, things could get really exciting for some of these altcoins. And I think Bitcoin will be leading that charge.
Yeah, I mean, he of course, his belief is that there's just so many things within the credit cycle, the liquidity cycles that are playing into this that have pushed out where this market is going, and it's all about access to capital. Even though liquidity right now is a little thin on the books, but of course that came from a fairly big, liquidity, shock in the system that we got a chance to live through here. And it's interesting to me because even with that event occurring, crypto almost didn't skip a beat. And that is the beauty of it, because I think now it's becoming much more resilient for average investors to start to come into the market and get into it. And if you think about that and just the amount of news that has kind of hit this week in terms of just all these different companies that are pushing in this direction, the other thing that plays into this is where are the prices of these precious metals? Because this, of course, all relates to the dollar. And when
Yep.
you get into the dollar, you start to get into utility components. So when you look at JP Morgan's recent analysis saying $8,000 gold by 2028, this could shake the very financial market if we see an $8,000 gold. This is something that has been crazy. Where do you think we will be if we have an $8,000 gold in terms of the debasement trade? And this is going to be on all the major assets. XRP, Ethereum, Bitcoin are probably going to be vying for that spot. What's your anticipation of those kinds of market conditions?
You know what's exciting is that I think people are underestimating how much things can change over these next few years. And you outlined an $8,000 gold by the end of 2028.
Yep.
I've made strong proclamations here where I've said I believe XRP will be a triple-digit asset by the end of the Trump's administration. This plays very well into that whole debasement trade. Now, there's a linchpin here, and I think you referenced it back in the late 90s. When the Telecom Act was passed in 1996, what happened to the market? Legitimate projects and everything that wasn't legitimate exploded in price for the short term. 96 to, I believe it was late 1998, the markets were in euphoria. And I'm anticipating that exact same thing happening here with the Clarity Act, because when we have strict rules and guidelines and we know exactly what these technologies are not only capable of, but how we can take advantage of these new capabilities, that's going to open up the floodgates. And you combine that new demand with the ETF products that will be available. We have the Treasury company going live. We have RLUSD stablecoin creating mass adoption. And most importantly, the EVM sidechain is now live. This is a very under talked about narrative where developers who are comfortable in building on Ethereum can now launch those decentralized applications into the XRP ledger and expand that ecosystem as well, creating more decentralized products all throughout the crypto space. So tying it back to your initial question, if we're looking at an $8,000 gold, I'm an XRP centric guy. I think we're going to be looking at a triple digit XRP when it's all said and done.
Interesting. We had Dom and Phil on talking about the expansion of developers, and they kind of reinvigorated me around where the development is going on XRPL, especially with you look at just what you connected there in terms of the EVM sidechain and connectivity of where XRP could go, because it all is going to boil down to opportunity that's going to start playing into the space. And I think, to your point, as we see a lot of this acceleration on some of these key assets, imagine the amount of developers that are going to flock to those key asset areas. It's just like when Silicon Valley, we saw developers flocking to Oracle, flocking to in the early stages of what was happening with Microsoft. I was there and it was amazing because we were sucking up all the devs from all the smaller companies.
Right.
So be thinking about that. What chains could be, in essence, be cannibalized around this? So especially coming with an $8,000 gold. Another thing, of course, we're going to kind of talk about is this right here. Coinbase CEO Brian Armstrong said, hey, we're up here. We're trying to get this done. He says they're trying to get it done by Thanksgiving in terms of the Clarity Act. What's your think about this or thought about this? I mean, we're seeing a lot of stuff coming out of DC, both good and bad. Do you feel like they could do it?
I'm optimistic. I like to say I'm an optimistic yet realistic guy. And the reason that I'm so optimistic about this Clarity Act is because this is going to benefit traditional companies. Companies like Apple, Amazon, Meta, Facebook, or I should say Google, all of these different industry leaders have already developed digital wallets behind the scenes. And that's not my opinion. Charles Hodgkinson has said this on several occasions. We saw earlier this week that Apple products are working on developing a digital wallet that could have capabilities of Bitcoin to begin with, but we know that's the Trojan horse that gets us through the door. And once
Right.
Bitcoin is enabled on Apple Pay, we're going to see Ethereum, we're going to see
Huge.
XRP, and we're probably going to see another half dozen digital assets. But for retail investors who don't understand why the Clarity Act changes everything, when these large applications and these leaders of the industry begin launching digital wallets, that is going to onboard billions of new users into the crypto space because of this simplicity and the ease of access of these technologies. I also covered a story earlier this week where we saw Walmart was going to be integrating OnePay at their registers. That would allow people to spend their Bitcoin, Ethereum, and XRP at the Walmart stores nationwide. Now, I advocated for this, Paul. I said, get rid of those US dollars. Don't sell your XRP for some avocados. Don't give it away to Walmart. But I think the simplicity is going to make a lot of people realize, wow, there's a lot more here than what I've been told about digital assets. I can spend this similar to cash.
Do you think we're in this phase right now where the crypto native are becoming numb to this news? You know, because you've got, this was another story with Fidelity. Now, the Fidelity is one of the largest asset managers out there and is one of the biggest brokerage out there in terms of the United States. They announced that they're going to be allowing direct access to Solana. They've already had Litecoin, Bitcoin, and ETH. So now Solana is going to be available in your Fidelity account. For those of you who are brand new to crypto, you'll be able to get another asset over there. You know what's coming next, Abs. They're going to drop XRP in Fidelity. And if they do, the amount of exposure based on the pent-up demand of people hearing about it for so long, because that's the thing still, when people ask me about crypto, sure, they'll ask about Bitcoin. The next one they always ask about is XRP. And these are people that have never been in crypto before. So it's interesting because now you're going to have an opportunity where someone like Fidelity could segue that into possibly millions and millions of Americans. What do you think about this? Do you think that will increase the validity and the demand for retail XRP?
Absolutely. And this is something I've said for a very long time. If you really look at what's playing out here, it's the perfect storm. This is a dream case scenario for crypto investors. If the passing of the Clarity Act happens sometime around Thanksgiving, and when the US government is back in their offices, they approve these altcoin ETFs sometime in late October to early November.
Yep.
You also have the Fed signaling they're going to reduce quantitative tightening and begin quantitative easing. That's out of JP Morgan just this morning. They're expecting an announcement next week. So with all of these different liquidity moments that are happening here for XRP, there's only so much available on public exchanges.
Sure.
Now you factor in the Evernorth acquisition or the Evernorth launching on the NASDAQ,
Yep.
You're going to have additional $1 billion of demand going right to retail exchanges and buying that XRP. Now, you had referenced this prior to stream, and I think it's so important, guys. The order books are everything in the crypto market. When you think about inflows, don't think about it like $1 billion comes in and your token will increase $1 billion in market cap. The evidence and data, and I want to give a shout out to Zach Rector on this. He's done a phenomenal job covering this content, as well as Jay Claver. The evidence tells us that on the inflows, when $1 billion comes in, you're looking at anywhere from a 50 to a X multiplier. Now, that also works on the way down. And we experienced this over the weekend. I believe it was 2 weeks ago now, where Bitcoin dropped, these altcoins got hit. The order books were so thin on exchanges that as these traders began getting liquidated, there was a cascading effect to the downside. We're going to see that same cascading effect to the upside here when all of these different inflows are turned on at the end of 2025. So I continue to fight against the bears in this space who are telling the newer retail investors, we're in a bear market. I don't see this thing's over.
Yeah.
Everything tells me otherwise, having been a veteran and been here for quite a while.
You can't listen to them because in many cases they're passive researchers, if researching at all, and they're looking at just crypto narratives on X. I think that in itself, most of the time I just pay no attention to the egg, what I call the egg accounts, which, you know, sure, they call you many names, which I'm sure you get hit as much as I do. So, but it's interesting because if you look at this idea and this theory that's been really analyzed for quite a while, and this is all around the idea of XRP moving off exchanges and into custody solutions. So BitGo's a big one, you know, a lot of institutional wallets, any OTC markets that most likely are moving in this direction. And now you have all this exposure coming into the market, which creates more demand.
Right.
I don't know. I'm just curious. At some point, we're going to see a hit on XRP supply shock. And the real question is how and when that occurs. One thing that might happen, Abs, is this right here. I want to share this with you. When you look at the potential, this was Novogratz talking about this very thing, is that once we get the potential for this market structure bill and it passes, he thinks this year, expect a jolt to the upside. So this is going to go in with, I think, a handful of basket assets. Bitcoin will be one, ETH will be one, and I think XRP is going to be the other that will benefit from that. Is that your opinion right now, is that we are nearing that phase because we're so numb to news, we're missing all of this amazing, amazing trend that's developing right before us?
I completely agree. I think there's going to be an onboarding process that starts at the back end of this year that extends all the way into the summer of 2026.
Yeah.
And although the ETFs are what's getting everybody's attention, guys, the Clarity Act is what's absolutely most important
100%.
because of the reasons that I had outlined prior. When every single investor understands they need 3, 5, 10% exposure to digital assets, that is when we deviate from the cycles definitively. That's when we're going to see parabolic momentum, like people have been predicting in this space since all the way during the Biden administration. And the last caveat here that I would keep in mind is that, yes, Bitcoin will lead the charge. But my belief is that these altcoins will have a higher return on investment over these next 4 years. And the data is very simple. Bitcoin, let's round it off and call it a $100,000 asset. For this thing to get to $1 million, we're going to be looking at a $20 trillion market cap, roughly. Yeah. If you apply the same concept to an XRP token, that's only 180 billion in market cap. Well, if we get to about $3 trillion, we're looking at the same returns. And so I think there's so much more optimism and possibility for these altcoin ecosystems like an HBAR, like a Solana, like an Ethereum, and of course, like an XRP here in 2025, because that real world adoption will create sustainable demand and kind of separate the wheat from the chaff.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that boils into this is a clip I'm just getting ready to bring on, is this statement by Governor Waller. Did you hear this? What he was?
Did.
Okay. So interesting points that he was making. And of course, my statement was pretty straightforward. I'll play this for you, Ab, so you can kind of hear it.
You know, you should be able to pay some kind of reward or yield on the actual T-bills and money market funds that you're holding. You should be able to pass some of that on to customers.
It's not an investment vehicle. It's not a time deposit where you're holding it to earn interest, right? You're not holding currency for its yield. If Congress wanted to let you pay interest, they should have just said, let you pay interest. So trying to backdoor it is a little funny. It's not supposed to bear interest. And, you know, at that point, it's not up to me to decide whether that's up to Congress. That's why I don't want to think about paying interest on these payment accounts. It's not supposed to be an account for somebody to hold stablecoins and earn interest. You're not holding it to earn interest. So it's a claim on the banks. You can disintermediate a bank, but you can't disintermediate the banking system. You don't.
All right. So I love that statement. Can't misintermediate the banking system, disintermediate. My statement was, this is just disgusting. You know, the only way this works out, because the banks are essentially now, I think, realizing there's no stopping this train. We're done. It's a matter of where do we position. And now they're going at, which I think is why we're seeing such issues in DC right now, where the left and the right are starting to try to position, because you have these lobbyists that are essentially almost pushing the talking points of the Fed right there. Right. Is that we're going to keep you, all you plebs, from earning interest on your, your stable coin, your RLUSD, your USDC. And my statement is DeFi is soon going to be you cannot stop this next generation from shifting the narrative. And I think they're too late. My question, do you think they're too late, Abs?
Not only are they too late, they did everything they could to destroy this industry over the past 4 years. And what I think is so important about that for retail investors is that if you just entered this market, you're not going to understand the adversity that we had to overcome these last 3 or 4 years here in 2025. So what I find so interesting about these statements is that they did everything they could to destroy this industry over the past 4 years and were unable to do so. When you look at the banking industry, executives like JP Morgan were not only outspoken about the industry, they wrote letters to the OCC earlier this year in 2025 trying to remove Ripple's ability to become a national charter. And I had referenced this prior to the stream as well. Ripple's 120-day window here to receive their national banking license, well, that ends on October 30th. So I think that all of these national banks should be very concerned about companies like Coinbase and Ripple continuing to absorb people who are keeping 20, 30, 50 grand in their savings saying, I'm going to hold it at Bank of America.
Mhm.
Let me actually get it on an exchange, take advantage of some of these stablecoin yields instead. That is going to be the new norm when it's all said and done.
Well, and I think the key is having access. Now, granted, most of these exchanges have I would say fairly consistent and speedy access to transfer funds in and out of banks. In most cases, it's next day at best. We haven't seen real time yet, but the minute that we have the actual capability of an ABA and a routing number within these exchanges, and I know, Robinhood's trying to get this done. Yes, Coinbase is going to get it done eventually. And there's probably going to be a handful of others. But once we have active crypto to a certain extent, some access to DeFi wallets, and the ability to hold basically a bank account to where you can pay out of it, run a debit card from it, whatever you want to do, even though I know Coinbase has that, so don't hit me up in the comments. But the point being is that right now you can't do an ACH other than into an existing bank, which has a routing number. And that's when it gets into these master accounts, which is what Waller was talking about, these skinny accounts. It's almost as if they're trying to sidestep this market to avoid some of these majors of coming in and playing in the banking business. So, man, this is it's getting very very intriguing. And it's, listen, the rats eventually all run out into the open when all the doors are shut.
As well, Paul, is that it's becoming a political issue. We're seeing the left become anti-crypto, the right become pro-crypto, and they're losing the game here. I would really say if I was on the left, hypothetically, let's say I wanted to expand my reach. Well, I would start preaching pro-crypto narratives and let people know, hey, Democrats are also pro-crypto, because the majority of Americans who learn about this technology and understand what it is, when you do your research, you want exposure. So anybody who does their research over these next couple of years, if the left decides to be the anti-crypto policy, I guess, Trojan horse here, and they think they're going to be able to reduce a lot of the adoption we've seen, it's just not going to occur. They're going to lose voters, and they're probably going to lose elections.
Well, yeah, but the key, though, Abs, is this amount. It's the lobby engines, really, when it boils down to it. You're talking about one of the biggest lobby engines out there now, granted, which is the banking industry, granted the pharma, the banking, and to a certain extent, we know who it is, and that's the military. When you get into defense spending, those are the three lobbies that pretty much control the puppets of DC. And now crypto, I think, is starting to move into this, the four horsemen, so to speak, of power lobbies in DC. They may get their way, and that as long as the puppets have a chance to jump over to another ship, on like crypto, then yes, I think that's possible. However, while the power of the banking lobby has these politicians by the nuts, basically, this is the kind of activity we're going to see coming out of DC. And this gets back down to the point of, which I'm still very concerned about, is the Clarity Act getting passed this year. Now, I feel like it will be done, but there's a lot of side speak coming out of DC for sure. Now, we're going to have somebody, one of our DC insiders, on the show next week to talk about that. But I want to jump over to the latest Tucker Carlson antic. I don't know if he was rage baiting or what he was going for here, but I have to bring this up because everybody has asked about it. This was even Coin Bureau that shared this. Shout out to Guy over there. I'll never invest in Bitcoin. The CIA created it. I mean, he said that out loud. And then, of course, there was all sorts of people coming at it. CIA did, and I think Max Kaiser was attacking Digital Perspectives. They went at it. Then you had Mahler going all in. This is crazy. When it comes out that defensive, instead of just, these people are crazy, and he is too. I always wonder, why be so defensive about something like that, CIA, NSA, who cares?
What's funny as well is, first of all, Max Kaiser has me blocked on Twitter because back in 2023, we had an exchange about XRP. He said, anybody who buys into these narratives, you're an uninformed idiot. He called me an idiot. And I followed up with not an emotional response, but just a list of reasons that I believed in the XRP ecosystem.
Block.
He did not respond. He just immediately blocked me, and I've been blocked ever since. So maybe that's God's work, and I should be appreciative of that. But in regards to what Tucker Carlson had to say about, I'll never invest in Bitcoin, the CIA created it, Well, I remember back in 2019 when I first learned about Bitcoin, this was one of my original concerns. A lot of people will talk about this being a positive thing, that Satoshi Nakamoto is this gift from God, and we've been given this amazing currency that will become the new global standard. I believe Bitcoin will be a success, but I do not buy into that narrative. I think Bitcoin was the first currency of many that will lead people into the crypto space. But as people become more educated and informed, they're going to naturally migrate to economies like the XRP ledger. And here's why. It's regulated. It's fully transparent. You know who created it. You know when it was created. Every question you could possibly have about the network can be answered. And that centralization narrative is slowly going away. As we see these ETFs begin accumulating the asset, as retail investors take charge, we're going to see mass adoption with the Clarity Act, like you've just highlighted. The centralization narrative of the XRP ledger will only continue to diminish throughout these next 3 or 4 years. And I would say this to kind of wrap it up. Nothing keeps me away from Bitcoin, right? I have exposure to Bitcoin, and I have since 2019. I believe that Bitcoin will continue to be successful. But my belief is this: as the market evolves, projects that are providing real utility will chip away at Bitcoin. Yep. Bitcoin will be this digital gold, the standard, the largest market cap in crypto until it isn't. And when it finally loses that advantage of being the number one digital asset, that could be a cascading effect, because then you're going to have digital economies creating sustained value that doesn't just come into the market and leave on a liquidity cycle, but instead is there being used every single day. And
Bingo.
Bitcoin just simply doesn't have that capability when you look at the technology.
Well, and there are so many different narratives behind where Bitcoin has gone from. Because originally, obviously, this, if you go all the way back to the white paper and look at the narratives of what its original mission was, it was designed to be a currency, and the concept was pretty simple. I know Jack is still trying to recreate the Bitcoin narrative of it should be used as currency. Obviously, we know what the Lightning Network represents in terms of real transaction capability. That's not going to be a case unless there is a derivative of Bitcoin itself, which, if you listen to some of the developers of it, I mean, if you go back to the block wars, I've talked to Paul Stortz many times about this very issue, and he's of the mind that it has to be in a position where it's got to change to be able to sustain and now if it does, then that's a different animal. But right now, the way it is, and of course it's all centralizing around these DATs, which is really led by MicroStrategy. In reality, now Saylor, who was the biggest champion of the industry when it comes to Bitcoin, now I wonder if he's a liability, in terms of just centralizing so much Bitcoin in one place. And there's only one way out for him, and that's up or to sell. Right. So if he goes up, that's more centralization of a fixed asset. And if he sells, that's a problem for a fixed asset because of the price impact that it would have on the market. Dom, we're showing his a tweet right there because he was kind of hitting on this issue of Tucker, saying, it's easy for maxis to dismiss Tucker Carlson's Bitcoin comment as clueless, but the point is one shared by many. A lot of people ask this very question. So not hating on Bitcoin. I'm just simply giving you guys an understanding of any kind of investment you're looking into, how you look at it, whether it's speculative as an asset, which is the way I view all of digital assets right now. It's all speculative until there is utility that is proven. Once that changes, then everything, I think, underneath it changes. Just like AI. Once AI can prove real utility outside of where we are today, watch out, man. We are getting ready to
If there was one more point I could add to this, Paul, it's that if you look at what happened back when these spot Bitcoin products were finally approved in the US, it was companies that had spoken out against Bitcoin for years that now became their biggest advocates. I'm anticipating the exact same thing. The second these large companies like BlackRock can offer an XRP product and profit off the developments, they're going to be some of the biggest cheerleaders for the space. They're going to be talking about decentralization and the speed and utility of the network. And they're going to be talking about how you can take $1,000 and buy 1% of Bitcoin, or you can take $1,000 and you can buy 350 XRP.
Exactly. Yeah.
Whether that's a rational way of thinking or not, that is clearly how the regular retail investor's mindset is. And I think Dom had actually said that in a different exchange on Twitter a couple of days ago, where he said a lot of new people come into this market and they say, I've got $5,000, I've got $10,000. How can I make the most of it? Well, I can buy a tenth of a Bitcoin, or I can buy 3,500 XRP. And then you look at the market caps of these individual projects, and it's $2.5 trillion for Bitcoin, give or take, and only 150 to 180 billion for XRP. The growth potential is so much higher. And rational people are going to figure that out on their own.
Well, and this is where you start to see much of the what I call kind of the secret plan in open of Ripple playing out. We talked about it with Dom and Phil, and this is these strategic acquisitions that have played out in Ripple's favor. Obviously, the most recent one with G Treasury. Then you have the news of this right here drop, and this gets very interesting because now we're talking about XRP and Ripple almost merging together in terms of an effort. And what I mean by that is David Schwartz, Brad Garlinghouse, both of which are advisors with Evernorth now. An interesting timing where Schwartz leaves his tech role as CTO, and what is it, 3 weeks later? 3 weeks later, this gets dropped in our lap, and the whole strategy in which they're going to acquire XRP is one which is completely different than most of the digital asset treasuries out there. Explain to our viewers, Abs, because I thought your breakdown was brilliant around Chris Larson, Brad Garlinghouse, and the type of moves that they're making behind this little company called Evernorth.
You know what this really highlights for me, Paul, is that old narrative that Ripple is invested in the success of Ripple and they don't care about the XRP ledger. This news, this headline, exact opposite of that. Yeah. And I am anticipating just more and more use cases for XRP when it comes to projects like this. Going back to what you had referenced with David Schwartz, if you remember what his statement was when he initially left Ripple, he said, my passion is working on the XRP ledger and creating DeFi applications. Bingo. What did he do? He just got a brand new role working on the XRP ledger and creating a DeFi application for a $1 billion fund that is yet to hit the market. Now, when you think about this from how it's going to impact the price of XRP, you had referenced it prior. There's something very interesting about how they're going to acquire this XRP. Mm-hmm. They are going directly to exchanges to buy it just the same way me and you would. They're going to go to Coinbase. They're not going to do this over the OTC market. And what's my rational reason as to why? Well, they want the price of XRP to increase the same way we do. If they can create additional demand on these exchanges with the same amount of supply, you are going to have that supply shock in some way, shape, or form. And that keeps me excited.
Well, you got $200 million coming in by guess who? SBI, one of the biggest financial institutions in Japan. People thought that SBI had written this off. Had written off, not the deal with Evernorth, but had written off XRP in terms of where their future would go. And then they turn around and say, no, hold my beer. We're going to drop into this deal real quick, and we're planning to do more. $200 million coming in on the optional commitment from Ripple Labs, obviously the foundation to RippleWorks, and then $600 million through the PIPE, which is the private investment public equity. This is the model in which it goes into a financial instrument so it can go and be traded on the stock as a stock and as a true company out there. So pretty interesting points right now. And then, of course, there's been a lot of this FUD around Chris Larson. And the idea of Larson moving, vast amounts of XRP off exchanges, et cetera, saying he's dumping on you, when in reality, it is the opposite of where this is going into Evernorth. What do you think the capacity of this project? Do you think it can compete with Bitmine for Ethereum as a digital asset treasury, and of course MicroStrategy for Bitcoin? What are your thoughts?
What's interesting, Paul, is that I really think this is going to set the standard for what other companies do to kind of follow the lead that Ripple is creating here. When you look at what Michael Saylor did with the Bitcoin treasury strategy, what have we seen? Dozens, if not hundreds of companies follow that same narrative. So regardless, in my perception, regardless of if Evernorth ever grows to the size of MicroStrategy, I think this is going to compete because it's going to create a new business model driving liquidity onto the XRP ledger. Yeah. And if I could, I just want to go back to your statements about Chris Larson, because I do think there is some quote unquote nefarious activity that's happening in the XRP community where there is an intentional misleading of information here. People will put out headlines that they know are misleading because they're going to get more clickbait.
Why do you think that is?
I think that people are rooting for XRP to fail. I think that there's a good amount of people who are trying to keep people away from this asset. And I have friends who are like this. I'll just speak to this on a personal level. They bought Bitcoin, they bought Ethereum, and they brushed off XRP all the way until that price run that we experienced in November of 2024. That really validated our community in a way that we've been waiting for. Yeah. But because they had been dying on that hill that XRP is a stable coin, XRP is a security, XRP is going to be kicked out of the US, then now that they're being proven incorrect, it's almost like they don't want to admit they're wrong. And so there's this big narrative here from people who are in the Bitcoin and Ethereum network to keep XRP down. That's really what they want. And I want to provide a second note to that. I think they view it as a legitimate competitor. And that statement really says it all. But I highlighted this prior. Why is Ethereum the number 2 blockchain in the space? Stablecoins and smart contracts.
Yep.
Those two narratives have really driven Ethereum to where it is today. What is the XRP ledger launched in the last 12 months? The RLUSD stablecoin and the EVM sidechain, which allows DeFi and smart contracts.
Bingo.
These headlines, we are informed, and by we, I mean the YouTubers and the people who watch this content on a daily basis. You have an understanding of this market that most people do not have. So when you look out at the masses and you read Twitter and you see these people who come into the market and they leave the market and they come back during a bull run, they're the ones who are going to get absolutely crushed by these misleading headlines. So in regards to Chris Larsen, there's a misconception about Chris Larsen that he caught the top of XRP's bull run back in 2018. If you look at the data, XRP went from a fraction of a penny to nearly $4 in only 240 days.
Right.
That is 70,000% gains. Well, Chris Larsen took no profit during that time. It wasn't until after the price chart had corrected back to $1 that Chris Larsen even took his first profit on XRP. And people will say, well, why is a co-founder selling XRP? He's got a portfolio worth $6, $7, $8, $10 billion, depending on the day. So $100 million worth of profit, it's about 1% of his entire portfolio. It's really small when you view it from a percentage of portfolio perspective instead of a US dollar value. So I hope that dispels some of those fake rumors.
And this is not an uncommon activity by a lot of the founders of many of these big blockchains. These are, everyday activities that occur, even with some of the foundations that obviously have to run operationally. But I think there's so much here that we're waiting on. And you've got also, I think, again, we're still going back to the whole theme of adoption, which is really the big difference between this previous cycle and where we are today. 155 altcoin ETFs now are setting up for approval. They could get the nod within the next 3 to 6 months, and we could see a massive rush into the space. XRP will be one of those. And this is my theory behind this. And this goes in conjunction with what we do on our market sentiment index, that is a measurement tool that tracks not only sentiment activity on all the top blockchains. Right now, we're tracking about 5,000 assets totally, but really it boils down to about 150 that are the key ones. And the amount of bot traffic that's coming in on each one of those. We can tell you which blockchain by its community has the most bot activity. It is not XRP. I won't say the chain that has the highest, but it's one of your big ones. And the point I'm getting at is you have real community behind this. So when you have real community and you have now this massive exposure on ETF, that real community is going to do one thing, and that is Moore's Law, which is exponential growth into people who know nothing about XRP or crypto. So you're taking a massive Moore's Law theory, applying it to now application where everyday people are going to be able to get access to this with a click of a mouse in their brokerage account, their exchange account, wherever they are in the essence of investing. This changes in a big way just because of that whole concept around community. Have you seen any other community that even comes close to the XRP community?
No, if I could guess, I would say if the community with the most bots is Solana. That would be my guess if we were taking a question, if we were taking a quiz here. You can let me know after the stream if I got it correct or wrong. But what I do find interesting about what you'd said is I'm constantly reminded of the Telecom Act back in the late 90s. When you look at the Amazon stock and what happened, I've drawn the correlation between the XRP price chart today and what the Amazon stock did back in the 90s. And there's some really strong correlations there. Like, first of all, Amazon created an all-time high at $5 and then traded below all-time high for several years. I believe it was 7 or 8 years. XRP did almost the exact same thing, but then the the Telecom Act was passed and we got 12 years. Let me say that again. 12 years of price action that just went up and to the right for Amazon investors. That's what I think the XRP community really has to overcome here, guys. We have not hit that euphoric moment. The fireworks, the light show, it has not started yet for XRP because of all the catalysts that we just outlined that are yet to occur. So when these ETFs are live and we're tracking inflows, when these stablecoins are ubiquitous with the American economy, they're everywhere. People are using them for savings accounts and on exchanges. When you have EVM sidechain for XRP launching decentralized apps and people using them, that is when I think we get that 12-year up into the right price action that we've been waiting for. And that's why it's everyone's responsibility right now to sit on your hands. Sometimes inaction is the best form of action. Don't talk yourself out of the investment of a lifetime because you didn't have the patience to wait a couple of years to have a lifetime worth of generational wealth and freedom. So I think that's really what people should keep in mind.
Well, right there is the January the 2015. So that's about a 10-year span. Let's go back to 13 right there. And that's your number right there on Amazon, 1,900%. Okay. Now, granted, this is the beast of beasts, but there's a lot of these new products out there that many people would think. I mean, you could also look at someone like a Robinhood if you want to look at, the related and the hedge bets around where crypto is going. All of those potentially. Obviously, NVIDIA, I'm still a little questioning as to whether or not they would be a play for me, but I do like the Robinhood move right here. You can't beat that move when it comes to. But again, this is all because of their activity in crypto. This is all crypto profits, okay? And most of that was on the back of Doge, So, and then of course we had Robinhood listing Hype. Did you see that this morning?
I did.
They just listed Hyperliquid. So it just tells you, where we're going. Of course, many people will understand this chart right here, and that is coming off the floor like Rocky Balboa. It's almost like you just stands right up after getting knocked down.
And it's funny too, because Paul, you would look at this chart and you say, wow, this community must be excited. I mean, look at what they went through in these last 12 months. And then you go and look at crypto Twitter and people are disappointed in some of the price action. I feel the complete opposite. But since you have this chart pulled up, you know what I'm reminded of? When you look at that liquidity wick that we went through about 2 or 3 weeks ago at this point, I was analyzing the 2017 bull market. And if you go to TradingView 2017, there was a massive liquidity event that had happened just before the euphoria hit in that huge blowout top moment for XRP. So even if you don't have to pull it up live, but just for the sake of people who weren't here during that time, even back in 2017, when we had 70,000% gains during that really short term. Sorry about that. What'd you say?
Look at that move in 21.
Right. And there you have it.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about that 2021 move is that, again, when was the greatest opportunity? That liquidity wick after they had been sued by the SEC. We were trading at 17 cents and we were at $1.90, I think 4 months later. So people have to understand that when retail investors are scared, that's a time to be optimistic. When retail investors are optimistic, that's a time to be cautious and scared.
Well, and that hit almost in tandem with the first run for Bitcoin above 60K during that period of time, being April 2021. So interesting times right now. Cycles, I'm still, obviously I believe in the bigger, broader cycles. How the crypto market works, I think so many influencing factors have played into it now that it's almost going to be impossible to predict. And even the best traders out there, and even though I hear this from, Tom Lee and a lot of the perma bulls, out there, Tom Lee's still thinking we could see a 200K Bitcoin end of year, and he's still pointing at, a $10,000 to $15,000 ETH. So if that is the case within those two markets, you can only imagine where XRP would be, which is setting at the number 4 asset, after that fake pump from BNB, as they liquidated the market, a few weeks ago. So crazy stuff out there, Abs. If you're saying watch for this in the next few months, Clarity Act, what we're going to see around the financial institutions adoption, because we're getting news every day. And then you look at just in general, the Fed, which could give us 75 basis points by end of year.
Yep.
What would you say is kind of the thing to watch right now for you guys?
What's interesting? I'll go back to the price chart and then I'll go to Catalyst here, is that when I'm looking at the XRP price chart, doing my own technical analysis, and I have no insight other than what I do on my own price charts, right? But I'm really looking at that next breakout taking us to $4.50. So I wanted to make sure I said that during today's episode. For people who aren't familiar with TA, if you want to have a reasonable approach, if you want to kind of look at some ranges, I think we can confidently hit, and I'm saying with extreme confidence, $4.50 is essentially that next leg up. Now, when we get up there, nobody knows what will happen. We could go into an explosive momentum. We could test the waters, come back, retest all-time highs. But my belief is the catalyst that will take us there is going to be these ETFs. the ETF approval turning on these inflows is going to create some really exciting price action for XRP. And it goes back to the order book discussion we had prior. If we see $5 billion worth of inflows, which I believe it was Canary Capital CEO actually predicted on your show, and then I think he doubled down on that, saying maybe 1 to 2 billion on day one. If something like that occurs, $1 billion in a single day hitting these order books, my goodness, take my 450 price projection, crumple it up, chuck it out the window. We're going to have to start this analysis from scratch. And I think we're going to go far beyond those price levels.
Well, that's an 80% move right now on a 450 from where we're trading right now at around 240, holding a position as we go. Sentiment's starting to climb up on XRP2, even as Bitcoin is edging back to 110. Yep. This is going to be a heated fall into Christmas. I wonder where we will be at Christmas time on this one. This will be maybe a nice Christmas. We'll see, Abs. Anyway,
listen, if Santa's listening, $4.50 XRP, that's all I'm asking.
That would be a good one. Yeah, that would be a good one. A nice one for everybody to kind of take home. Of course, as I said, if you're not following Abs over on Good Evening Crypto, make sure and do that. We try to get the best guests on here. You guys, of course, can DM me. I leave my DMs open, even though I get some interesting DMs. But I will just say, I leave them open. I try to get through them as many as I can. Occasionally, I do have a person who helps me with that. Just the flow of them are a little heavy in terms of trying to keep up with it. But that's where we ask for the best guests that you guys want on this show, like Abs and others. Just let us know. Abs, where can they find you on social?
You can find me at the Good Evening Crypto channel on YouTube or Abs GM Crypto on Twitter, guys. So check it out. That's going to be the Good Evening Crypto Twitter very soon, just making that transition as we speak. But I wanted to say a massive thank you to Paul. It's always fun having these conversations. And you know what's great? It's like you can just ebb and flow. We actually have very similar mindsets on this stuff. I'm just trying to learn as much as I can from Paul and kind of take it all in. But the number one thing that I've realized is that as this market expands, it's guys like yourself that are really going to have an impact, bringing new investors into this space and giving them a rational understanding. So thanks for all the great work you do. And I'm always appreciative when you have me on.
It's going to be awesome, man. This podcast is exploding. But more importantly, I think the crypto market in general is finally reaching some new minds. And to me, if we can help one person, get in a position to where they can better their life, then we've done something to kind of get to the next level. And I hope for all of you guys that are out there, whether you're doing content or just talking on Twitter and helping others, or just maybe at the water cooler, it's not that you're trying to get them into crypto. It's just get them into the research. Let them go make their own decision, but get them into the research, because that's been the hump, really, to get into cryptos. Nobody wants to do the research. They just want to be told to buy this or that.
Another major thing I've been able to do, Paul, is I've said, what? If you don't believe in crypto, everybody has $10. There's no harm in opening up an exchange and you start the process. You get them $10 worth of Bitcoin. The journey started. I've seen it 1,000 times over. So you don't have to even tell people, hey, go out and buy X amount. Just say, you know what? Everybody has $5. Skip Starbucks coffee, throw it into Bitcoin. I guarantee you're going to be appreciative of that in the long run.
Yeah. Abs, thanks again. And of course, you guys know what to do. Like and share this video out there. We'll catch you later right here on the XRP Pod.